Hello everyone. Please tell me, which city are you listening from? What time is it there? It was one of those evenings when the city seemed quieter, the kind of late afternoon where the sun hangs low and the streets feel a little empty, like the world is taking a breath before nightfall. I had just left work, still wrapped up in the haze of a long day, my mind worry with all the thoughts and responsibilities I hadn't quite let go of. I walked without much direction, just following the familiar streets I usually took when I needed to clear my head. As I turned the corner onto a narrow street, I noticed the soft strains of music drifting through the air. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to catch my attention, a mellow, almost haunting melody that seemed to blend seamlessly with the city's quiet hum. I paused, looking down the street to see where it was coming from. It was a street musician, a man sitting on a weathered stool near a street lamp. He was playing an old violin, the kind that had seen better days, with the bow gliding over the strings in slow, deliberate strokes. His eyes were closed, his face peaceful, absorbed in the music. He wore a simple coat, faded and worn, but his presence, his playing, seemed to fill the space around him. The world around me felt quieter, as if the music had slowed everything down. The melody was beautiful, but there was something about it that struck a chord in me, something familiar, something that tugged at the edge of my memory. I stood there for a moment, listening, caught in the soft rhythm of the violin. The music itself wasn't anything too complex, just a slow, sorrowful tune, but there was a depth to it, a kind of sadness that felt like it belonged to another time, another place. I couldn't place why it felt so intimate, so personal, like the music was speaking directly to me. I stepped a little closer, my curiosity piqued. The more I listened, the more I felt like I knew the song, like it had been woven into my life. Somehow, in a place I couldn't quite reach. It wasn't a song I had heard in a concert hall or on a record. It wasn't something familiar in that way, but it was mine. It felt as though it was my song. The melody tugged at something deep inside me, pulling me into an emotional place I wasn't ready to visit. It was then that I realized the song was sad, too sad. It was a funeral song, the kind of mournful melody you hear when someone's passed, the kind that lingers in the air long after the last note has faded. But it wasn't just a funeral song. It felt too specific, too intimate. I could feel it in my chest, that hollow ache, as if I had heard this exact song before, in a place I couldn't remember. My heart began to race, and I felt that strange, creeping sense of unease that slowly started to take over my thoughts. I glanced down at the man, his hands moving gently over the strings. His face was still peaceful, lost in the music, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just playing for anyone. He was playing for me. This song wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't have been. The air felt colder now, and I stood frozen for a moment, my feet unwilling to move. I didn't know why, but everything about the moment, the music, the man, the way it seemed to speak to me made me feel like I was in the middle of something I wasn't supposed to understand, something too big for me to process. I didn't know what it meant, but my mind kept circling back to the same thought. Asterisk, this song shouldn't exist for me, but somehow, it does. I finally turned to walk away, my legs shaky, my heart pounding in my chest. The last few notes of the violin lingered in the air, but I couldn't bring myself to listen any longer. I couldn't look back at the man, at his still form, lost in the music. I felt like something was following me, like the notes of the song were trailing behind me, echoing in my mind. And as I walked down the street, I felt a strange, hollow sensation, like I had just witnessed something that had been waiting for me all my life, something I couldn't escape. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just heard my own funeral song played by someone who knew it better than I did. The thought clung to me, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. I kept trying to rationalize it, to tell myself it was just a coincidence, just a song that happened to sound familiar. But deep down, I knew something had shifted in me, something I couldn't explain. I've passed that same corner many times since that night. The street musician is often there, still playing his violin, lost in his music. But I can never quite bring myself to stop and listen again. Every time I hear the faintest strain of violin, no matter where I am, I think back to that moment, to that song, and I wonder if he's still playing it, my song, the one that somehow belongs to me, and the one that will always follow me, no matter where I go. I was stuck in traffic, the kind of slow, crawling congestion that makes you lose track of time. The honking of car horns echoed in the streets, the impatient tap of feet on the gas pedal, and the distant murmur of the city felt like it was getting louder with every passing second. I was already late for a meeting, and I could feel my stress building, my mind racing through everything I had to do that day. But then, something caught my eye. I looked up, distracted by the bright colors of a billboard looming over the street. It was one of those flashy advertisements, the kind you don't pay much attention to because they're everywhere. But this one was different. It wasn't the product or the message that drew me in. It was her, a woman's face, framed by vibrant colors, smiling down at the street. Her eyes were bright, her expression warm, and there was something about her smile that felt familiar. I couldn't place it at first, but there was something about her gaze, something that made me feel like she was looking directly at me. I blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the light, maybe a momentary distraction, but then she winked. It was subtle, barely noticeable at first, but unmistakable. One quick, confident wink, just as if she knew exactly where I was, exactly who I was, and exactly how to get my attention. I froze. It wasn't possible. I told myself it was just a billboard, a printed advertisement. The model on the billboard didn't know I was there, didn't know anything about me. But the moment I saw that wink, something inside me stirred. The way she smiled, how she seemed to know me, how her eyes locked with mine, it felt real, too. Real. I glanced around, but no one else seemed to have noticed. The cars around me were still, the drivers oblivious to the billboard's sudden shift. No one was reacting. Just me. My heart was beating faster now, my palms beginning to sweat. I turned my gaze back to the billboard, half expecting the image to change, to return to the generic, distant smile it had shown before. But no. There she was again, smiling, her eyes locked on mine, as if she was waiting for me to acknowledge her. I tried to shake it off. I turned my focus back to the road, telling myself that it was just my imagination, that it was just a fleeting moment, but I couldn't get her out of my mind. Her wink kept playing over and over in my head, like a song stuck on repeat. The light turned green, and I stepped on the gas, eager to get away from the strange feeling that was creeping up my spine. But even as I drove away, I couldn't help but glance back in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her face still, staring at me, watching me, like she was always there. The moment passed, and the noise of the city returned, the routine of the day washing over me. I convinced myself that it was just a weird coincidence, a momentary glitch in reality. It was a billboard, after all. There were hundreds of them all over the city, constantly flashing ads and faces, trying to grab our attention. There was no reason to read into it. But later that day, as I went through my usual routine, I found myself thinking about it. Asterisk, she winked at me, asterisk. Why had I reacted the way I did? Why did it feel so real? I dismissed it as a weird experience, something my brain had made up out of sheer boredom or stress. But something lingered, something I couldn't quite shake. A nagging feeling that I couldn't quite put into words. That night, I turned on the TV to relax, flipping through channels to unwind. And there it was, the same woman. This time, it wasn't a billboard. She was on a commercial, smiling at the camera, selling some kind of beauty product. The commercial was as glamorous and polished as any other, but this time, I didn't see her just as an actress. I saw the same smile, the same eyes, the same look, like she was still looking at me. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I watched the commercial, my gaze fixed on her, but there was something different now, something unsettling. As the ad ended, the screen went black for a split second, but before the next show started, something appeared, a quick flash, just a momentary blip on the screen. It was her face again, but this time, the image was accompanied by a single word, written in bold white letters. Asterisk again. The word blinked out as quickly as it appeared, but I froze. Again, it felt like a warning, like a message meant only for me. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was a coincidence, that I was just imagining things. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I hadn't just seen her on the billboard. The feeling that had settled into my bones, the lingering sense that she had been watching me, waiting for me, kept coming back. The next day, I walked down the street, trying to put the whole thing out of my mind. But when I turned the corner, I saw the billboard again. This time, there was no smile, no wink. Just an empty, vacant ad space, as if it had never been there. I stared at it for a long moment, the emptiness of the space growing larger, pressing against me. The words that had appeared on the screen again felt like they were still hanging in the air, waiting for me to understand them. And then, just as I turned to walk away, I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, but they're all the same. Asterisk, I'm still here. I don't know who she is, or why I saw her, or why she keeps showing up. I don't know if it's my mind playing tricks on me, or something more unsettling than that. But every time I pass that street corner, every time I see an unfamiliar face in an ad, I can't help but wonder if she's still there, watching me, and if, one day, she wink at me again. I had always been one to take my time with walks, especially when the weather was perfect, like it was that day. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden hue over the city, and the park was unusually quiet, save for a few scattered joggers and the distant hum of traffic. It was one of those peaceful evenings where everything felt in balance, and the only thing that mattered was the rhythm of my steps against the pavement. I turned a corner into the older part of the park, a section that was home to statues and forgotten monuments, pieces of history, half hidden in the overgrown ivy and weathered stone. It was a place I'd passed by countless times, but I had never really taken the time to stop and appreciate the statues. They were a collection of people, warriors, animals, all frozen in time, their faces either stern or serene, their postures rigid and unyielding. The park was full of these stone figures, but no one seemed to care much for them. They were simply part of the scenery, like the benches or the trees, quietly gathering dust. That's when I noticed it. I had walked past this particular statue many times before, an imposing figure of a man, dressed in armor, with a sword raised above his head. He stood tall and proud, a monument to some forgotten hero, but today, something was different. His hand, which had always been frozen in midair, suddenly seemed too real. I slowed my pace, unsure of what I was seeing. The statue's outstretched hand, which had once been rigid and unmoving, now appeared as if it were reaching toward me. I stopped in my tracks, staring at it. The way the sunlight hit the stone gave it an odd shimmer, almost as if the hand were catching the light in a way it hadn't before. I took a step closer, unable to look away. I wasn't sure why, but there was something about the hand, something too real, too alive. And then, just as I was standing directly in front of it, it happened. The statue's hand moved. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. The fingers twitched, then flexed, as if they were trying to make contact with something. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't possible. Statues didn't move. Statues didn't reach out. But there it was. The hand, once solid and unmoving, was now extending further. The fingers curled downward, as if beckoning me to come closer. I took an involuntary step backward, my breath catching in my throat. My mind raced to rationalize, it was just a trick of the light, the angle of the sun. But no, I could see the fingers. They were moving, slowly, deliberately. The world around me seemed to fall away, the distant hum of the city and the parks. Usual noise becoming muffled, replaced by the thudding of my own heart in my chest. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't sure what to do. My instinct told me to run, to turn around and leave, but something else kept me rooted in place. The statue was reaching for me. Then, in a moment that felt both slow and impossibly fast, the fingers of the statue's hand curled around my wrist. I flinched, my breath hitching in my throat. The stone felt real, cold and unyielding, yet somehow alive with force. The touch was gentle but insistent, and I could feel a weight. Like the statue's hand was pulling me closer, dragging me into something I couldn't quite understand. I pulled back instinctively, but it wasn't enough. The grip tightened, and for a split second, I felt the strangest sensation, a connection. A pulse that vibrated through my bones, like the statue was alive with some kind of energy that surged through my body. I could feel it faint, almost like an electric current, running from the stone into my skin. I yanked my arm away, stumbling backward, my pulse pounding in my ears. The statue's hand released me, the fingers uncurling slowly, as if they had never been locked around my wrist in the first place. But the coldness of it, the sensation of being held, lingered. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing, unsure of what had just happened. I turned around quickly, not daring to look back at the statue, and walked away. My legs felt unsteady, like I was walking in a dream, each step too heavy. I didn't dare to glance back, knowing that if I did, I'd see the statue's hand reaching for me again, beckoning me into its grasp. When I finally made it to the edge of the park, I stopped and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling, but something inside me was still unsettled. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, if it was some trick of my mind, but I knew one thing: I'd never look at that statue the same way again. I never went back to that corner of the park. I never passed that statue again, though I sometimes drive by, glancing at the park in the distance. I wonder, sometimes, if the statue is still standing there, its hand outstretched, waiting for someone else to walk by. And I wonder if, one day, someone else will feel that pull, that strange tug, that connection between the stone and the living. I remember the night I first heard my name echoing through the empty subway station like it was yesterday. The city had been soaked in rain all day, and the evening was no exception. I had just missed the last train home after a late meeting. My phone's battery was dead, and there was no way to check the schedule, but I wasn't too worried. I figured I'd wait for the next train, as the subway station was a quiet, familiar place, something I had passed through countless times. The dim lighting, the cold concrete walls, and the metallic scent of dampness that filled the air made it feel like home, in an odd, almost soothing way. The platform was entirely empty, save for a few flickering lights above, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch further than they should. The rain outside drummed steadily against the glass windows, and the sound of rushing water filtered through the walls. A light breeze blew in from an open vent, carrying with it the chill of the underground. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and leaned against the wall, deciding to wait rather than take a cab. Something about the subway felt grounding, a sense of anonymity I didn't mind in the late hours. As I stood there, I noticed how strangely quiet it was. The usual hum of distant trains and the soft shuffle of commuters was absent. The silence was oppressive, pressing against my ears in a way that made every tiny sound feel too loud. My shoes scraped the floor slightly as I shifted my weight, and the echo of it bounced back at me, making me feel watched. I looked around, instinctively, but the station remained as it always was, abandoned and stagnant, frozen in time. The platform stretched into shadows, the exit doors on either end far out of sight. I glanced at the large clock on the far wall. It read to 15 a.m., the dead of night. I sat down on the cold metal bench to wait. I had been in this station 100 times before, but tonight, something felt different, unsettling even. I couldn't place it. Perhaps it was the loneliness of the hour, or the way the lights seemed dimmer than usual, but it felt like the station was holding its breath. The way the rain pressed against the windows outside made the air feel thick, heavy with something unspoken. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper, like a voice carried by the wind, brushing against my ears. It was so quiet at first, I thought. I imagined it. I turned my head sharply, but there was nothing, no one in sight. The shadows shifted as if responding to my movement, but that was all. I dismissed it quickly, thinking I was just tired. my mind playing tricks. But the whisper came again. This time, clearer. It was my name. Soft, but distinct. Asterisk, it hung in the air, like a breath drawn too long. I froze. It wasn't a distant echo. No, it was right there. Behind me, or was it beneath me? I couldn't tell. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't move. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Who could be here at this hour? The station was desolate. I stood slowly, my shoes tapping softly against the cold platform as I moved cautiously toward the edge, peering into the dark hallway that led deeper into the station. My breath felt shallow, each exhale puffing in the damp air like smoke. The only sound now was the slow rhythm of the rain outside. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Perhaps someone had missed the last train as well. I felt stupid for letting my mind wander. But that voice, so faint, so real, it was too unnerving to ignore. I took a few steps forward, walking toward the tunnel that led to the opposite platform. Each footstep echoed around me, growing louder as I walked, yet I felt like something was moving behind me. The shadow of my own thoughts seemed to stretch unnaturally, clinging to me as if they were my own, but foreign at the same time. I glanced behind me again, half expecting to see someone there, but there was nothing. It wasn't until I passed under the flickering overhead lights that I noticed something odd. The light seemed to bend slightly, the shadows pulling inwards, wrapping around me. I was too tired to consider the possibility of it being a trick of my eyes, too exhausted to care about the unnerving sense of claustrophobia that was slowly tightening its grip. I reached the next set of stairs, leading deeper into the station, and then there it was again. The whisper, my name, but louder this time. A clear call, as if it was coming from the walls themselves. My pulse quickened, and I felt my skin tighten with anxiety. I stopped in my tracks, looking down both ends of the platform. Nothing, no one. Yet the voice hung in the air like a forgotten memory. I stepped back, nearly stumbling over my own feet, my legs unsteady. That was when I noticed the change. The station had become unnaturally cold, colder than it should have been. I could see my breath now, a faint mist in the air. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease settling in my chest. I turned toward the exit, deciding that the train could wait, and started walking briskly toward the doors. But as I did, I heard something else, something harder to ignore. A shuffle of footsteps, soft but distinct, following me at a distance. I dared not look back. The hair on my neck stood on end as I reached for the handle of the exit door, but it wouldn't budge. The door was locked. I pulled harder, my panic rising. The voice came again, sharp now, closer, as if it was right behind me. It was my name, but distorted somehow, no longer soft, but demanding, insistent. A sense of dizziness took over as I tugged at the door with all my strength. But just as I thought I couldn't stand it any longer, the sound stopped. I turned around, trying to catch my breath, searching for anything that would explain this madness. And then, in the faintest light from the overhead bulbs, I saw it. A figure standing across the tracks, just at the edge of the shadows, unmoving. No face, just a silhouette. My heart raced, and every instinct told me to run. But I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to blink. The figure didn't move, It just watched. Or at least I thought it did. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. Vanished into the dark recesses of the station. I tried to rationalize it, tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but the weight in my chest told me otherwise. The station was silent again, so quiet it felt unnatural. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring into the dark tunnel that seemed to stretch on forever, waiting for any sign of movement, any sign that this was real. Finally, a train pulled in, the doors opened, and I stepped onto the empty car, my body trembling with a coldness I couldn't shake. The sound of the train pulling away was a relief, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. And the worst part, when I finally got home, my phone buzzed with an alert, a missed call from an unknown number, and a voice message. I played it without thinking. It was a whisper. My name, asterisk, but this time, it sounded like it was coming from the other side of the line. It was me, calling myself. I don't go back to that station anymore. It happened on a cold, drizzly evening. The kind of night where the air feels heavy, and everything smells like wet pavement. I had just finished a long day at work, feeling mentally drained. I was heading home, ready to curl up under my blankets, with a hot cup of tea. I'd missed the last bus, and I didn't want to walk in the rain, so I hailed a taxi. The yellow lights of the cab shone in the distance, and I waved it down, grateful for the ride that would save me from the chill. The cab pulled up to the curb with a soft squeak of the brakes, and I climbed in quickly, eager to get out of the damp night air. The driver, an older man with graying hair and tired eyes, nodded at me without saying anything. I settled into the back seat, closing the door behind me and letting out a long sigh. The warmth of the car felt like a balm against the cold, and I slumped against the leather seat, my eyes closing for a moment. As we drove through the empty streets, the rhythmic hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of streetlights outside created a lull that made me feel strangely at peace. I glanced out the window, watching the rain streak across the glass in uneven lines, the city lights blurring into pools of color. The city was quieter than usual, and I found myself wondering if it was because of the rain or the late hour. Then, a voice broke through the silence. It was soft, almost like a whisper, but clear enough for me to hear. "Excuse me, could you drop me off at the next corner?" I turned my head instinctively, expecting to see someone sitting next to me, but when I looked, there was nothing. The seat next to me was empty. Just the faint outline of the seatbelt, barely visible in the dim light, but no one else was there. I blinked, confused. I glanced at the driver through the rearview mirror. He was still focused on the road, his expression blank, completely unaware of the voice I had just heard. I told myself it was probably just the wind, or maybe the sound of the wipers wiping away the rain playing tricks on me. But then, the voice came again, clearer this time. "Could you drop me off at the next corner?" I felt a chill run down my spine. My heart began to beat a little faster, my mind racing. I turned my head once more, and there, sitting right beside me, was a woman. She was dressed in a long, dark coat, her face partially obscured by the hood she wore. I could only make out the faintest glimpse of her features. Pale skin, dark eyes, and lips pressed into a thin, almost expressionless line. She was looking out the window, not at me, as if she hadn't noticed I was there at all. The strangest part was how still she was. Not a single movement, not even a slight shift in her posture. It was as if she wasn't breathing, as if she were part of the car itself, like some sort of ghost. The silence between us was suffocating, and I wasn't sure whether I should speak to her or pretend I hadn't seen her at all. I glanced at the driver again, trying to gauge if he had seen her too, but his eyes never moved from the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel with a firm yet tired grip. I didn't understand. How could he not see her? She was sitting right there, in plain sight. The voice came again, and I realized it wasn't just a whisper anymore. It was almost like she was speaking directly to me, but without moving her lips. "Could you drop me off at the next corner?" I was frozen, my mind racing. I opened my mouth to ask the driver if he could hear her too, but no words came out. Instead, I just watched wide-eyed as the woman slowly turned her head toward me, her dark eyes meeting mine. There was something unsettling about her gaze, something empty, as if there was nothing behind her eyes, no soul to be seen, just darkness. The driver took a turn, and we approached the next intersection. I glanced nervously at the woman, wondering what to do. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even acknowledge my presence except for that chilling stare. I wanted to ask the driver to stop, to let me out, but I couldn't form the words. My body felt heavy, frozen in place. I didn't know what was happening, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As the car slowed to a stop at the intersection, I felt a cold draft sweep through the cab, despite the windows being shut tight. It didn't make sense. There was no reason for the air to feel so cold, but it was like a sudden wave of ice washed over me, leaving me shivering. I glanced at the driver one last time, desperate for him to acknowledge something, anything, but he remained oblivious, his gaze still fixed ahead. The woman slowly stood up, her movements unnaturally slow, as if she were weighed down by something invisible. She turned to face the door, and I saw her hand reach out toward the handle. Without thinking, I blurted, "Wait, where are you going?" She didn't respond. Her hand just hovered over the door handle, as if unsure. But then, with a slight jerk, the door opened on its own. She stepped out into the rain without a word, her figure disappearing into the night, swallowed up by the misty darkness. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty seat beside me. My breath was shaky, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, to shout at the driver, to tell him what had just happened, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. The words wouldn't form. I watched the woman's figure vanish into the night, my mind unable to process what I had just seen. Had she been real? Had I imagined it all? The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I finally turned to the driver, but he still hadn't said a word. He was completely unaware of what had just taken place, as if the woman had never been there at all. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but as I got out of the cab, I glanced back at the rear-view mirror, and for just a second, I saw her reflection, staring back at me. I don't take taxis anymore. I was walking home from the bar that night. The streets empty, except for a few scattered puddles that reflected the pale glow of the streetlights. It was one of those nights where everything felt just a little off, the air heavy with the scent of rain and something else, something faint, almost unnoticeable, but still there, like the aftertaste of a forgotten dream. The city felt quieter than usual, too quiet, and I found myself pulling my coat tighter around me, though it wasn't all that cold. I passed by the old street clock on the corner, as I always did, a relic from a time long past. It had been there, as long as I could remember, with its brass hands and cracked glass face. Its ticking a comforting rhythm in the otherwise mundane bustle of the city. But tonight, something was wrong. The second hand was frozen. The minute hand, too. And the hour hand. It was stuck at midnight. Not a single movement, not even a slight quiver. I stopped for a moment, staring at the clock. It felt wrong. Almost like it was out of place in time itself, like it was trying to hold something back, or perhaps it had been waiting for something I couldn't quite grasp. I looked around, but the streets were still eerily empty. No cars, numbered people. Just the faint glow of the streetlights and the soft hum of the distant city. The clock tower's face seemed to mock me in the silence, its frozen hands staring down at me, as if waiting for me to move, to do something. I stepped closer, as if drawn to it. I don't know why, but there was an urge to touch it, to try, to make it move, to make time keep going. I reached out, and as my fingers brushed against the cold brass, I felt a sudden shift in the air. The wind seemed to still. The city's hum dulled to a whisper. And then, I heard it faint at first, but growing louder, like the sound of a distant echo of something wrong, a low, almost imperceptible hum coming from the direction of the clock. I pulled my hand back, looking around nervously. There was no one there, yet the sense of being watched, of being heard, settled over me like a thick fog. I turned away from the clock and began walking down the street, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. But as I walked, something strange happened. It was as if time itself had slowed. The air thickened. The familiar streets became unfamiliar. And each step I took felt heavier, as though I was walking through molasses. The sounds of the city had gone completely silent, but I could still hear the faintest ticking. A slow, rhythmic pulse that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I turned around, and there it was, again the clock, still stuck at midnight. But it wasn't just the clock. Everything had stopped. I glanced at a couple standing across the street, their figures frozen mid-step, their faces locked in expressions of joy, but their eyes were wide, empty, lifeless. Not a single breath moved them. I walked closer, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I reached out to touch the woman's shoulder, but my fingers passed right through her. She didn't react. I pulled my hand back, staring at her for a long moment. She was a ghost, a mere echo of something that had been real, but no longer was. I looked down the street, my gaze darting from figure to figure. Everyone, every single person, was frozen in place. People with their hands in their pockets. People caught in the middle of conversations. People standing still with their eyes fixed on some distant point. Everyone frozen in time, trapped in a moment that wasn't real anymore. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, and I felt the weight of the world pressing down on me. The ticking grew louder, now reverberating in my skull, the rhythm erratic but persistent, like a clock that had been wound too tight. I turned and ran, desperate, to get away from the frozen city, the dead eyes, the lifeless bodies. But no matter how far I ran, nothing changed. The street was the same. The faces were the same. The clock still hung there, its hands unmoving, its face mocking me. I found myself back at the corner, staring at the clock, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand. Was I the only one moving? Was I the one who was stuck, and everyone else was alive? Or was I the one who was frozen, and they were the ones who had moved on? I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe minutes. Maybe hours. It didn't matter. Time had no meaning anymore. Everything felt stretched out, like a nightmare you can't wake up from. Every tick of the clock seemed to drag on, heavy and unyielding. It was as if time itself was being held in place, waiting for something, waiting for me to do something. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the ticking stopped. There was silence, complete and utter silence. No hum, no echo, no sound. I looked around. The street was empty. Everyone was still frozen. The clock had gone back to its normal state, the hands moving forward once more, but the people, they didn't move, not one of them, and neither did I. I don't know if I'm still walking, still caught in that moment. I don't know if I'm still here, or if I've stepped into something else. All I know is that the clock, the street, the people, they never moved, not for me. I looked at the clock again. It was still at midnight, and I heard it. The faintest whisper, far too quiet to understand, but I heard it nonetheless. It was calling me, and one. I think I'm still listening. It all started on a late afternoon, when the golden hues of the setting sun were just beginning to fade into the cool gray shadows of the evening. I was walking down my usual route, the one I took almost every day after work. The streets were quiet, save for the soft murmur of distant traffic and the rustle of leaves stirred by the wind. I had my earbuds in, listening to music, letting the rhythm of the songs carry me along, not really paying attention to anything other than my own thoughts. As I turned onto a side street, I noticed something odd. The street signs, those usual, plain, and unremarkable metal plates, were different. They had always been simple, white text on a green background, just like any other street sign. But today, as I glanced up, I could see that the words seemed strange. Not just the font, but the way they looked. I stopped for a moment, pulling one earbud out and squinting at the sign in front of me. The sign read, Avenue. My first thought was that the sign had somehow been tampered with, maybe by pranksters. But the strange thing was, it wasn't just any random name on the sign. It was my name, right there in bold letters on the street sign. I stepped back, a chill running through my spine. Was I imagining it? I had to be. My name was unusual enough that it couldn't have been a coincidence, could it? But there it was, in black and white. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, convinced that I was just seeing things, tired after a long day. But when I looked again, the sign still read my name. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease that was creeping in. Maybe someone had changed it as a joke, or maybe it was an odd coincidence. But the more I stood there, the more I started to feel a strange tug in my chest. The kind of feeling you get when something is just off. Something that you can't quite place, but you know it's there. I shrugged it off, figuring it was nothing, and started walking again. As I moved further down the street, I came across another sign. This one was on a corner, pointing toward an alley I had passed hundreds of times but never really paid attention to. The sign again read, Avenue. But this time, the letters on the sign were different. They were arranged just a little differently. It wasn't just a simple repetition of my name. It was as if it had been rearranged. The letters had shifted somehow, but I still recognized it instantly. It was still my name, only backwards now. I stopped dead in my tracks, my pulse suddenly racing. My mind tried to reason it away. It must have been a mistake. I took a few shaky steps closer, staring at the sign, but the rearranged letters were unmistakable. I stepped back again, the unease in my stomach growing into something more tangible, something colder. I started to feel as though the very ground beneath me had shifted. The street, which I had walked down so many times before, suddenly felt unfamiliar. The world around me was no longer in focus. It was as if the ordinary, mundane setting had shifted into something surreal, something unsettling. Every street lamp seemed to cast a longer shadow than it should, and the distant hum of the city seemed muffled, almost as if I were underwater. Trying to shake off the feeling, I forced myself to continue walking, but the streets kept stretching. Before me, the familiar buildings and corners turning into something unrecognizable. I reached the next intersection and glanced up at the next sign. My heart stopped. This time, the sign didn't just show my name. It had a sequence of letters, like a riddle, spelling out something that made no sense at first. I read it over and over again, but it didn't matter how many times I looked at it. The letters still formed my name, in a completely jumbled order. I read aloud to myself, the chill creeping into my voice. I stepped back, staring at the letters as if they were a puzzle that I just couldn't solve. I felt the pull again, the feeling that I was being drawn into something. The ground beneath me seemed to quiver, as though the earth was alive and reacting to my every movement. I turned quickly, my feet moving faster now, almost involuntarily, but no matter how fast I walked, I felt like I was walking in circles, like the streets were shifting, stretching, rearranging themselves. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The signs were everywhere now, and they all spelled out my name, sometimes forwards, sometimes backwards, sometimes in an order that made no sense at all. I looked up, and the world seemed to spin. I was no longer sure of which direction I was facing. Every sign, every street corner was a reminder that this was not just a random coincidence. Something was happening. Something that couldn't be explained. I could feel the weight of the signs pressing on me, like the city was turning against me, its streets conspiring in ways I couldn't understand. I reached a street I didn't recognize. It was unfamiliar, dark, and the air was thick with fog. The lamplights flickered dimly, casting long, distorted shadows on the pavement. And there, right in front of me, was the final sign. This one was different from all the others. It was an older sign, the metal tarnished and faded, almost as if it had been there for centuries. But the words on it were clear, cutting through the fog and the mist like a beacon. It simply read, "You've been walking in circles." I froze. My chest tightened as if someone had just wrapped their fingers around my ribs. My legs felt weak, and I stumbled backward, my heart racing. The sign it was no longer just a sign. It was a message, a warning. I spun around, desperate to find something familiar, but it was all the same. The street signs, my name, written and rewritten in every possible form, chased me down every corner, every alley, each time in a new, more confusing arrangement. It was as though the city itself had conspired to twist time and space, trapping me in a loop of my own name. I don't know how long I've been walking. The sun has long since set, and the streets remain empty, the fog thickening around me. My name keeps following me, appearing in the signs, the shadows, the very fabric of the city itself. And now, I can't escape it. It's almost as if the city's trying to tell me something. Something I don't want to understand. It was one of those evenings where the city felt too big, too full of noise and movement, and yet, I couldn't help but feel isolated. I had just finished dinner with friends at a small cafe, but the conversation had drifted, becoming more surface level, and the night had slipped away too quickly. Now, I was walking alone through the city streets, my footsteps echoing softly on the wet pavement, the sound mingling with the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustle of the wind pushing against the trees. I didn't mind walking alone. Sometimes, I preferred it. The city at night has a way of revealing a different side of itself, quieter, slower, more intimate. The streetlights cast pools of warm yellow light onto the ground, and everything felt suspended in that soft glow. The air was cool, fresh with a hint of rain that hadn't quite arrived yet, and I found myself breathing it in deeply, letting it settle in my chest. I pass by the usual shops, their windows dark, their displays either abandoned for the night or just waiting for the morning rush. One shop, though, caught my eye. It was a small boutique, one I had never noticed before. Its window reflecting the street in a way that felt slightly off. At first, I thought it was just the angle or the rain-slicked glass. But as I drew closer, I realized it wasn't. The reflection wasn't quite right. I stopped in front of the window, looking at my own reflection first, just me, standing there, my face framed by the soft glow of the streetlights, my expression lost in thought. But then, I noticed something strange, a figure standing next to me in the reflection. A woman, her features blurred, almost indistinct. She was tall, her face obscured by shadows, but she was there, clearly standing beside me. I looked to my left quickly, expecting to see her in person, but no one was there. I took a slow step back, trying to shake off the unease that was crawling up my spine. I looked again at the reflection, and now she was closer, almost standing right beside me in the glass. The same blurred figure, her face still hidden. She was wearing a coat, dark and unremarkable, and her hair seemed to float around her face like it was caught in a wind that wasn't there. I glanced over my shoulder, thinking maybe someone was behind me, but there was no one. Just the empty street, stretching off into the night. I felt my heart beat a little faster, but I tried to calm myself. It was late, I was tired. Maybe I was just seeing things. A trick of the light, nothing more. But as I stood there, staring at the window, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She wasn't in the reflection at first, but she had appeared there, as if she had materialized from the shadows of the store itself. I leaned in a little closer, trying to get a better look. Her figure seemed to shift, almost imperceptibly, as if she were moving ever so slightly in the glass. There was a faint glimmer in her eyes, or what I thought were her eyes just dark voids, empty and unfathomable. I felt an odd pull, a strange connection, like the reflection was trying to say something to me. I backed away quickly, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The figure remained in the window, but now, something was different. She was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile, or even a malicious one. It was just a smile. An empty, unfeeling curve of the lips that somehow felt more unsettling than anything else. I turned to walk away, the unease in my chest growing heavier with every step. The sound of my shoes on the wet pavement seemed to echo louder now, as though the city had suddenly become unnervingly quiet. The soft breeze brushed past me, but I didn't feel any relief. It didn't feel like a simple night walk anymore. It felt like I was being watched, and I couldn't shake the sensation that something was following me, that she was still there, still watching me from that window. As I rounded the corner, I dared to glance back. The street was the same, bathed in soft light, but the reflection in the boutique's window was different now. She wasn't in the glass anymore. I could only see my own reflection again, standing alone on the sidewalk. But then, just as I began to turn away, I saw it faintly, but unmistakably a hand pressed against the glass from the inside. The same hand I had not seen in the reflection earlier. The fingers were long, pale, and almost translucent, pressing up against the window as if trying to reach out to me. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and walked faster, my legs carrying me away from the window, from the store, from whatever it was that I had seen. I don't know why, but I didn't look back again. I didn't go home right away either. I walked for hours through the city, trying to lose the feeling that had settled deep in my bones. I couldn't shake the image of her face, her smile, and that hand against the glass. The next morning, I passed the boutique again. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I couldn't bring myself to look at the window. I walked past it quickly, not daring to glance to the side. The memory of the reflection, of the woman who was never there, still lingered with me, echoing in my mind. I didn't want to know what might be waiting behind that glass. And yet, even now, when I walk by that street corner, I still feel the pull, that uneasy sensation that maybe, just maybe, she's still there, watching, waiting, still reflected in the glass. It was a typical Saturday afternoon, the kind where the sun hung high in the sky, casting warm, golden light over the city. I was at the annual street fair, strolling through the crowded market with my friends. There were food trucks with tempting smells wafting through the air, street performers juggling or playing music, and children running around with balloons, their laughter filling the air. It was a vibrant scene, alive with movement and sound. We wandered from booth to booth, admiring the handmade goods and chatting about our plans for the evening. I remember feeling a sense of contentment, the kind that comes from being surrounded by familiar faces in a place where everything feels safe and happy. The world felt ordinary, predictable, and I liked it that way. But then something happened that would change everything, something that didn't make sense at all. I was standing near the food trucks, trying to decide whether to get a pretzel or an ice cream cone, when I noticed it. A shift. At first I thought it was my imagination, the heat of the day making me dizzy, but no, it was real. The crowd had stopped moving. Everyone, without exception, had frozen in place, like they had been paused in some unseen way. The street was full of people, yet no one was walking, talking, or even breathing. The sounds of laughter and chatter had ceased as well, leaving behind an eerie silence. The street performers were still standing, frozen mid-act, a juggler with his hands outstretched, the fire breather with the flame hanging from his mouth, suspended in time. The children, their balloons caught mid-bounce, were frozen with their little hands still reaching for the sky. I stood there, blinking in confusion, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My friends, too, had stopped moving, their faces locked in expressions I couldn't read. A sense of panic started to creep into my chest. Asterisk, what's happening? I wondered. Asterisk, why are they frozen? But it wasn't just the crowd that was frozen. I turned in a slow circle, my heart pounding. Every movement in the street had halted, the world itself suspended in a strange and unnatural stillness. The only thing that seemed unaffected was the wind, which still blew gently through the trees, rustling the leaves with a soft whisper. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick, as I tried to comprehend what was happening. And then I saw her. She was standing near the edge of the crowd, but unlike everyone else, she was still moving. Slowly, deliberately, she walked through the frozen figures, her feet barely making a sound on the pavement. There was something unnerving about her, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. She was dressed in a long, flowing coat, her hair dark and wild, her face half obscured by the hood. She didn't look like anyone I knew, but there was something oddly familiar about her. Like I had seen her before, though I couldn't recall where. I found myself watching her, drawn to her despite the chaos unfolding around me. She walked with purpose, moving through the crowd like she owned the space. She was the only one who wasn't still, the only one who wasn't trapped in time. I wanted to call out to her, to ask what was going on, but the words wouldn't come. I stepped forward, taking a tentative step toward her, my eyes never leaving her figure as she moved gracefully through the frozen crowd. She seemed to notice me, or at least, I thought she did. Her head tilted slightly, as if she had heard my footsteps. And then, to my horror, she turned and looked directly at me. Her eyes were dark, deeper than I could ever have imagined, pulling me in like they held the weight of the world. I stopped in my tracks, feeling as though I had been struck by lightning, my entire body frozen in place just like the others. The world around me had gone still, and all I could see was her. She smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't comforting. It was knowing, predatory, as if she had been waiting for me all along, as if she had always known I would be here, at this exact moment, in this exact place. I tried to take a step back, my legs trembling, but it was as if my body no longer belonged to me. I couldn't move. The smile widened, her gaze never leaving mine, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. The frozen crowd, the sound of the wind, the world itself, it all blurred into the background, leaving only her, her smile, and that impossible, endless darkness in her eyes. And then, just as quickly as it had all begun, the world snapped back into motion. The juggler caught his balls in midair, the children's laughter resumed, and the sound of the street fair flooded back in. People started walking again, talking, laughing, unaware of the stillness that had gripped them just moments before. The vendors called out to customers, and the music resumed, a cheerful backdrop to the mundane activities of the street. I blinked, trying to process what had just happened. The woman was gone. The street was full of people again, just like before, with no sign of her presence. I looked around frantically, searching for any trace of her, but there was nothing. No trace of the eerie stillness, no sign that she had ever been there at all. But I knew what I had seen. The way her eyes had looked at me, the way the world had frozen around her. It wasn't a trick of the mind or a strange hallucination. She was real. Whatever she was real. I left the street fair shortly after that, unable to shake the feeling that she was still watching me, that she would be waiting for me, wherever I went next. The crowd had resumed its rhythm. The city had gone back to normal, but I couldn't forget her face, that smile, and the way time had stopped for her. It's been weeks since that day, but every time I step into a crowd, I feel her presence lingering, just out of reach. I never see her again, but I feel her, and I can't shake the feeling that, someday, the crowd will freeze again, and she will be the only one still moving. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, and I was walking down the street near my childhood home, the same street I had walked countless times as a kid. The houses looked the same, familiar, comforting, with their worn-out paint and aging fences. The neighborhood had always been peaceful, and though I hadn't lived there in years, I still liked coming back every so often. It was like stepping into a time capsule, everything frozen in place, just as I remembered it. I was passing by the old corner store when something caught my eye. A payphone. I stopped in my tracks, staring at it for a moment. It was old, the metal frame tarnished by time, the phone itself covered in faded graffiti and layers of dust. It seemed out of place in today's world, where everyone had a cell phone in their pocket. I remembered it from my childhood. My friends and I used to use it when we were too young for our own phones, dialing random numbers just to hear the ring. I walked closer, curiosity gnawing at me. The payphone had been out of order for as long as I could remember. I couldn't even recall the last time I saw anyone use it. It had been abandoned for years, its line long since disconnected. Still, there was something about it, some lingering memory, that made me stop and take a closer look. And then, as if drawn by some unseen force, I reached out and picked up the receiver. The moment my fingers touched the cold plastic, a sharp jolt of static crackled through the line. I hesitated, unsure whether to put it back down. But something about the sound, something urgent, pulled me in. I brought the receiver to my ear. "Hello?" I asked, my voice wavering, unsure of what to expect. There was silence on the other end at first, then a faint click, followed by the soft sound of breathing. My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to hang up, to walk away, but I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to the ground. I didn't know what it was, but there was something compelling, almost magnetic about the call. "Hello," I repeated, my voice stronger this time. A voice, low and distant, came through the static. "Do you remember me?" I froze. My mind raced. The voice sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. It was distant, like someone calling from a great distance. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I don't, I stammered, the words feeling like they were caught in my throat. The voice didn't sound like anyone I knew. "Think," the voice said, its tone almost pleading. "You were always so good at remembering." I took a step back, the receiver still pressed to my ear. The sound of the voice, the way it seemed to echo in my mind, sent a wave of unease flooding over me. I had to hang up. I had to get away from this, from whatever it was that was happening, but I couldn't. "Who is this?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. There was a long pause. The line crackled, and I could hear faint whispers in the background, words that didn't quite make sense. The static grew louder, and then the voice came again, softer now, almost a whisper. "It's me, from before. Do you remember?" I swallowed hard. I couldn't breathe. The voice sounded like a memory, like something from my past that I had long buried. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't place it. I couldn't remember. I was about to say something, anything, to end this strange conversation, when the voice spoke one last time. "You'll remember eventually. It's too late to hang up now." The static intensified, and before I could react, the line went dead. The dial tone echoed in my ear, loud and jarring. I stood there for a long moment, the receiver still pressed against my ear, my heart racing. I slowly lowered the phone, my hands trembling. The world around me seemed different now, as if it had shifted while I wasn't looking. I felt a deep sense of loss, of something forgotten, something that I couldn't quite grasp. The payphone, the voice, it was all connected to something I couldn't understand. The street around me seemed unchanged, as if everything was normal, but deep down I knew something had happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that the past, something long buried, had just reached out to me, and now it was impossible to ignore. I turned away from the payphone, walking quickly back toward my childhood home, my footsteps quickening. But with every step I took, I felt like something was following me. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone there, but no one was behind me. The street was empty. Yet, as I walked, I felt an unsettling certainty. That voice, that connection, wasn't over. It was still there, lingering, waiting for me to remember. And as much as I tried to push it out of my mind, I knew deep down that I wouldn't be able to forget. The phone call had just been the beginning. It was late in the evening when I first noticed her, standing by the edge of the sidewalk, just beneath the towering shadow of the city's tallest skyscraper. She looked out of place, out of time, her long, dark coat swaying gently in the wind, her face hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat. She was the only one standing still in the midst of the bustling street, her presence almost surreal in the rhythm of the city. People moved around her, unaware, as if she were a fixture of the night, an ordinary part of the cityscape. I wasn't planning on stopping, but something about her stopped me. Her posture was rigid, and her gaze was fixed on the skyscraper across the street. I didn't know why, but I couldn't take my eyes off her. Something about her seemed knowing, like she had seen something I couldn't, something I wasn't supposed to. I should have kept walking. I really should have. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, watching as she pointed upward, her finger cutting through the air, directing my attention to the top of the building. For a moment, I wondered if she was just pointing out some kind of advertisement, some new light show or sponsored message. But that's when I saw it. The lights of the skyscraper flickered once, twice, and then suddenly, the entire building illuminated, the lights shifting in sync to form words. At first, I couldn't believe it. I rubbed my eyes, certain that I had misinterpreted it. But no, There it was, bold as day, spelled out in bright, neon lights across the face of the building. Run. My heart skipped a beat. The word pulsed against the dark night, as if alive, as if it were calling out to me. I felt a sudden, sharp chill run down my spine. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't some art installation. It was a warning. I turned toward the woman. She was still standing there, perfectly still, her gaze locked on the building. Her finger still pointed upward, unmoving, as if she had known this would happen. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something dark. And knowing that made my pulse race. Why? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The word felt foolish as soon as it left my mouth. I hadn't meant to speak, but the question was clawing at my chest. Why was this happening? Why me? Why now? She didn't answer. She didn't even acknowledge me. She just stood there, her fingers still directed at the glowing lights, her silence louder than any words could be. I glanced back up at the skyscraper, my breath catching in my throat. The lights had shifted again, now flashing rapidly, as if urging me, pleading with me. Run. The word was flashing, almost like it was alive, flickering and pulsing, louder than the city around me. It felt like the building itself was speaking directly to me. My feet shifted, almost against my will, as if the lights were pulling me toward them. I wanted to leave, to run far away, but my body felt frozen. A strange force seemed to be locking me in place, and I couldn't look away. The crowd around me had continued on, oblivious to what was happening. Everyone was moving, going about their lives, while I stood there, paralyzed by the blinking lights. Then, a voice, faint but unmistakable, broke through the haze in my mind. It wasn't the woman beside me. It wasn't the crowd. It was coming from the building, from the lights themselves. The voice was distant, echoing, but I could hear it clearly in my mind. Run. I turned and ran. It wasn't a choice. It was as though something inside me had snapped, the command breaking the paralysis, urging me to move, to get away. My legs moved faster than I thought possible, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't know why I was running. I didn't know who or what was chasing me, but I knew I couldn't stay there. As I ran down the street, I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, something, following me. But the street was empty, the city's usual hum of noise echoing through the air. The lights of the skyscraper still burned bright behind me, but I couldn't look back, I couldn't stop. The street curved, and I pushed myself harder, my body urging me to keep going. I didn't know where I was going, just away. But with every step, that feeling in the pit of my stomach grew heavier. Something was wrong, something I couldn't explain, but that feeling, that insistent pull, it wouldn't let me stop. I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away, panting, dizzy from the adrenaline. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. The lights, the woman, the run, what had just happened. Why did it feel like I was being hunted by something that wasn't even visible, something I couldn't name? I stopped in the middle of the street, staring back at the skyline. The skyscraper loomed in the distance, its lights now completely still, as if nothing had ever happened. I waited for the flicker of the lights to return, for the message to appear again, but there was nothing. The building stood silent, unchanging, its lights now dark. The strange feeling of being watched never left me. I turned around, feeling the weight of the woman's gaze still upon me, even though I hadn't seen her leave. I was sure of one thing now. Whatever I had witnessed, whatever I had heard, it wasn't over. Something, somewhere, had just begun, and I wasn't going to be able to outrun it. The lights had stopped flashing, but the command still echoed in my mind, and as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching, waiting. It was a typical evening, the kind where the sky seems to stretch on forever, a pale orange hue sinking into the horizon. I had just finished work and was on my way home, walking along the familiar stretch of sidewalk near the bus stop. The streets were busy, filled with the usual mix of people rushing to their destinations, the hum of city life swirling around me. I wasn't in any rush, though just content to let the world move around me while I took in the last bit of daylight. I stood at the bus stop, idly checking my phone, waiting for the number 42 to take me home. It wasn't a busy time of day just past rush hour and I was expecting the bus to arrive shortly. The sound of the wheels on the pavement, the distant hum of traffic, and the occasional cough or mutter from the people around me filled the air. But something felt different. There was a tension in the air, something I couldn't quite explain. The kind of feeling you get when you're sure something's about to happen, but you don't know what. I glanced up just as the bus pulled into view, the headlights cutting through the early evening gloom. The number 42 was clearly visible on the front, and I stepped forward, preparing to board. But as the bus slowed down, something strange happened. I looked inside through the windows as the doors opened, and what I saw made my stomach tighten. Every single passenger was staring back at me, and I mean every one. They were all sitting perfectly still, their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. But it wasn't just that they were staring. All had my face, my exact face, the same brown eyes, the same nose, the same shape to the jaw, even the same expression, blank, impassive, unblinking. They looked like reflections of myself, somehow, each one a perfect replica, yet lifeless, eerily still. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and my mind struggled to process what I was seeing. I knew it wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But there they were, lined up in their seats, every one of them an identical version of me, staring as though they were waiting for me to get on. For a moment, the bus driver's face caught my eye as well. He too had my face. He looked at me, expressionless, and gave a small nod, as if acknowledging that I was supposed to board. But I couldn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the rows of people, each one a mirror image of me. I wanted to run, to scream, but the air felt thick, suffocating, and my body felt paralyzed, like I was stuck in some waking nightmare. I took a step back, unable to shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something that wasn't meant to be. I glanced at the people around me, but they didn't seem to notice. They continued on with their own lives, oblivious to what I was witnessing. I took another cautious step backward, and that's when the bus doors slammed shut, almost as if they had been waiting for me to step on. The bus lurched forward, its headlights briefly illuminating the street before it turned down the corner, and disappeared from view. I stood there, still frozen in place, my pulse racing. What the hell was that? My mind raced, trying to find an explanation, any explanation. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was some bizarre hallucination. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The undeniable truth that those people on the bus had been me. All of them. Just like me. I couldn't bring myself to take the next bus. I walked home instead, every step feeling heavier than the last. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see another version of myself walking behind me, watching me. But the streets were empty, and everything seemed normal, or at least as normal as it could be. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the image of those faces. Every detail was etched into my mind, the way they sat, the way their eyes never left mine, the way the bus driver had nodded to me as if it was completely ordinary. But I knew it wasn't. Nothing about it was ordinary. I haven't seen another bus with my face since that night. But the feeling that something is waiting for me, something that I can't escape, still lingers. I wonder if I'll ever catch a glimpse of one of them again, staring at me from across the street, or from behind a window. Maybe they're out there somewhere, living lives that are just like mine, yet entirely different. And maybe, just maybe, they're waiting for me to board that bus.